Good morning. This is the second take, by the way. I gotta find my spot now here. Starting over again because when I did it the first time, it didn't record my voice. So the pricking sensation became a. Oh yeah, sorry. This is where Horace and Will got attacked by the 3 battle school apprentices, and Halt stepped in, and so now there's an altercation. The pricking sensation became a little more pronounced, and as he tried to look down, Alda gave a gasp of fear. Remember, Halt stomped on Alda's foot? Halt's larger knife, razor-edged and needle-pointed, was just under his chin, pressing lightly into the soft flesh of his throat. "Don't ever talk to me like that again, boy," the ranger said, so softly that Alda had to strain to hear the words. "And don't ever lay a hand on my apprentice again. Understand?" Alda, all his arrogance gone, his heart pounding in terror, could say nothing. The knife pricked a little harder against his throat, and he felt a warm trickle of blood sliding down his collar. Halt's eyes blazed suddenly like the coals of a fire in a sudden draft. "Understand?" he repeated, and Alda croaked a reply. "Yes, sir." Halt stepped back, resheathing the knife in one fluid movement. Alda sank to the ground, massaging his ankle. He was sure there was damage to the tendons. Ignoring him, Halt turned to face the other 2 second-year apprentices. Instinctively, they had moved closer together and were watching him fearfully, uncertain as to what he was going to do next. Halt pointed at Bryn. "You," he said with his words edged with contempt. "Pick up your cane." Fearfully, Bryn moved to where his cane lay on the ground, Halt's arrow still embedded halfway along its length. Without taking his eyes off the ranger, fearing some trick, he stooped at the knees, his hands scrabbling awkwardly until he touched the cane. Then he stood again, holding it uncertainly in his hand. "Now give me back my arrow," the ranger ordered, and the tall, swarthy boy struggled to remove the arrow, stepping close enough to hand it to Halt, tensed in every muscle as he waited for some unexpected move from the ranger. Halt, however, merely took the arrow and replaced it in his quiver. Bryn stepped hurriedly back out of his reach. Halt gave a small, contemptuous laugh, and then he turned to Horace. "I take it these are the 3 who gave you those bruises?" he asked. Horace said nothing for a moment and then realized that his continued silence was ridiculous. There was no reason why he should shield the 3 bullies any further. There never had been a reason. "Yes, sir," he said decisively. Halt nodded, rubbing his chin. "I rather thought so," he said. "Well then, I've heard rumors that you're pretty good with a sword. How about a practice bout with this hero in front of me?" A slow grin spread over Horace's face as he understood what the ranger was suggesting. He started forward. "I think I'd like that." Bryn backed away a pace. "Just a moment," he cried. "You can't expect me to—" He got no further. The ranger's eyes glittered with that dangerous light once more, and he took a half step forward, his hand dropping to the hilt of the sax knife again. "You've got a cane. I suggest you use it. Now get on with it," he ordered, his voice very low and dangerous. Realizing he was trapped, Bryn turned to face Horace. Now that it was a matter of one-on-one, he felt far less confident about dealing with the younger boy. Everyone had heard of Horace's almost uncanny natural swordsmanship. Deciding that attack might be the best defense, Bryn stepped forward and aimed an overhead slash at Horace. Horace parried it easily. He parried Bryn's next 2 strokes with equal ease. Then, as he blocked Bryn's 4th stroke, he flicked his wooden blade down the length of the other boy's cane in the instant before the 2 weapons disengaged. There was no crosspiece to protect Bryn's hand from the movement, and the hardwood drill sword slammed painfully into his fingers. With a cry of agony, he dropped the heavy stick, leaping back and wringing his injured hand painfully under his arm. Horace stood, ready to resume. "I didn't hear anybody call stop," Halt said mildly. "But he's disarmed me," Bryn whined. Halt smiled at him. "So he has, but I'm sure he'll let you pick it up and start again. Go ahead." Bryn looked from Halt to Horace and back again. He saw no pity in either face. "I don't want to," he said in a small voice. Horace found it hard to reconcile this cringing figure with the sneering bully who had been making his life uncomfortable for the past few months. Halt appeared to consider Bryn's statement. "Well, no, we'll note your protest," he said cheerfully. Now, continue, please. Bryn's hand throbbed painfully, but even worse than the pain was the fear of what was to come, the certainty that Horace would punish him without mercy. He bent down and reached fearfully for the cane, his eyes fixed on Horace. The younger boy waited patiently until Bryn was ready, and then made a sudden feint move forward. Bryn yelped in fear and threw the cane aside. Horace shook his head in disgust. "Who's the baby now?" he asked. Bryn wouldn't meet his gaze. He shrank away, his eyes cast down. "If he's going to be a baby," Halt suggested, "I suppose you'll have to paddle him." A grin spread over Horace's face. He sprang forward and grabbed Bryn by the scruff of his neck, spinning him around. Then he proceeded to whack the older boy's backside with the flat of the drill sword, over and over again, following him around the clearing as Bryn tried to pull away from the remorseless punishment. Bryn howled and hopped and sobbed, but Horace's grip was firm on his collar, and there was no escape. Finally, when Horace felt he had repaid all the bullying, the insults and the pain, he let go. Bryn staggered away and dropped to his hands and knees, sobbing with pain and fear. Jerome had watched the proceedings in horror, knowing his turn was coming. He began to edge away, hoping to escape while the ranger's attention was distracted. "Take one more step, and I'll put an arrow through you." Will tried to model his voice on the quiet, threatening tone Halt had used. He had retrieved several of the arrows from the nearest target, and now he had one of them ready, laid on the bowstring. Halt glanced around approvingly. "Good idea," he said. "Aim for the left calf. It's a very painful wound." He glanced over to where Bryn lay, sobbing on the ground at Horace's feet. "I think he's had enough," he said. Then he jerked a thumb at Jerome. "Your turn," he said briefly. Horace retrieved the cane that Bryn had dropped and moved toward Jerome, holding it out to him. Jerome backed away. "No!" Jerome yelled wide-eyed. "It's not fair! Well, of course it's not fair," Halt agreed in a reasonable tone. "I gather you think 3 against 1 is fair. Now, get on with it." Will had often heard the saying that a cornered rat will eventually show fight. Jerome proved it now. He went into the attack, and to his own surprise, Horace gave ground before the rain of blows aimed at him. The bully's confidence began to grow as he advanced. He failed to notice that Horace was blocking every stroke with consummate ease, almost with contempt. Jerome's best strokes never even looked like they were breaking through Horace's defense. The second-year apprentice might as well have been hitting a stone wall. Then Horace stopped retreating. He stood fast, blocking Jerome's latest stroke with an iron wrist. They stood chest to chest for a few seconds, and then Horace began to push Jerome back. His left hand gripped Jerome's right wrist, keeping their weapons locked together. Jerome's feet skidded on the snow as Horace forced him backward, farther and farther. Then he gave a final heave and sent Jerome sprawling on the ground. Jerome had seen what happened to Bryn. He knew that surrender wasn't an option. He scrambled to his feet and defended himself desperately as Horace began his own attack. Jerome was driven back by a whirlwind of forehands, backhands, side, and overhead cuts. He managed to block some of the strokes, but the blistering speed of Horace's attack defeated him. Blows rained on his shins, elbows, and shoulders almost at will. Horace seemed to concentrate on the bony spots that could hurt most. Occasionally, he used the rounded point of the sword to thrust it into Jerome's ribs, just hard enough to bruise without breaking bones. Finally, Jerome had had enough. He wheeled away from the onslaught, dropped the cane, and fell to the ground, hands clasped protectively over his head. His backside was raised invitingly in the air, and Horace paused and looked a question at Halt. The ranger made a little gesture toward Jerome. "Why not?" he said. "An opportunity like that doesn't come every day." But even he winced at the thundering kick in the backside that Horace delivered. Jerome, nose down in the wet snow, skidded at least a meter from the force of it. Halt retrieved the cane that Jerome had dropped. He studied it for a moment, testing its weight and balance. "Really not much of a weapon," he said. "You have to wonder why they chose it." And then he tossed the cane to Ulda. "Get busy," he ordered. The blond boy, still crouched, nursing his injured ankle, looked at the cane in disbelief. Blood streamed down his face from his shattered nose. He'd never be quite so good-looking again, Will thought. But I'm injured," he protested, hobbling awkwardly to his feet. He couldn't believe that Halt would require him to go through the punishment he had just watched. Holt paused, studying him as if that fact hadn't occurred to him. For a moment, a ray of hope shone in Alda's mind. "So you are," the ranger said. "So you are." He looked a little disappointed, and Alda began to believe that Halt's sense of fair play would spare him the sort of punishment that had been handed out to his friends. But then the ranger's face cleared. "But, just a minute," he said. So is Horace. Isn't that right, Will?" Will grinned. "Definitely, Halt," he said, and Alda's brief hope vanished without a trace. Halt now turned to Horace, asking with mock concern, "Are you sure you're not too badly injured to continue, Horace?" Horace smiled. It was a smile that never reached his eyes, though. "Oh, I think I can manage," he said. "Well, that's settled then," Halt said cheerfully. "Let's continue, shall we?" And Alda knew there was to be no escape for him either. He faced up to Horace, and the final duel began. Alda was the best swordsman of the three bullies, and at least he gave Horace some competition for a few minutes. But as they felt each other out with stroke and counterstroke, thrust and parry, he quickly realized that Horace was his master. His only chance, he felt, was to try something unexpected. He disengaged, then changed his grip on the cane, holding it in both hands like a quarterstaff, and launching a series of rapid left and right hooking blows with it. For a second, Horace was caught by surprise, and he fell back. But he recovered with cat-like speed and aimed an overhead blow at Alda. The second-year student attempted the standard quarterstaff parry, holding the staff at either end to block the sword stroke with the middle section. In theory, it was the right tactic. In practice, the hardened hickory drill sword simply sheared the cane, leaving Alda holding two halves. Totally unnerved, he let them drop and stood defenseless before Horace. Horace looked at his longtime tormentor and then at the sword in his hand. "I don't need this," he muttered, and he let the sword drop. The right-hand punch that he threw traveled no more than 20 centimeters to the point of Alda's jaw, but it had his shoulder and body weight and months of suffering and loneliness behind it, the loneliness that only a victim of bullying can know. Will's eyes widened slightly, and as Alda came off his feet and hurtled backward to come crashing down in the cold snow beside his two friends. He thought about the times in the past when he had fought with Horace. If he had known the other boy was capable of throwing a punch like that, he would have never done so. Alda didn't move. Odds were he wouldn't move for some time. Horace stepped back, shaking his bruised knuckles and heaving a sigh of satisfaction. "You have no idea how good that felt," he said. "Thank you, Ranger." Halt nodded acknowledgement. "Thank you for taking a hand when they attacked Will. And by the way, my friends call me Halt." Chapter 23. In the weeks following his final encounter with the three bullies, Horace noticed a definite change in life at the battle school. The most important factor in the change was that Alda, Bryn, and Jerome were all expelled from the school, and from the castle and its neighboring village. Sir Rodney had been suspicious for some time that there had been a problem among the ranks of his junior students. A quiet visit from Halt alerted him as to where it lay, and the resultant investigation soon brought to light the full story of the way Horace had been victimized. Sir Rodney's judgment was swift and uncompromising. The three second-year students were given a half-day to prepare and pack. They were supplied with a small amount of money and a week's supplies and were transported to the Fife's boundaries, where they were told, in no uncertain terms, not to return. Once they were gone, Horace's lot improved considerably. The daily routine of the battle school was still as harsh and challenging as ever, but without the added burden that Alda, Bryn, and Jerome had laid upon him, Horace found he could easily cope with the drills, the discipline, and the studies. He rapidly began to achieve the potential that Sir Rodney had seen in him. In addition, his roommates, without the fear of incurring the bully's vengeance, began to be more welcoming and friendly. In short, Horace felt that things were definitely looking up. His only regret was that he hadn't been able to thank Halt properly for the improvement in his life. After the events in the meadow, Horace had been placed in the infirmary for several days while his bruises and contusions were attended to. By the time he was released, he found that Halt and Will had already left for the Rangers' gathering. And that's where I'm going to stop for today, at the Rangers' gathering. All right, hopefully this time it works. See you later.